Good day everyone, and welcome to Hells Kier Extreme, where Suzaku of the Four Lords once again challenges us, but this time in her most powerful form. Hells Kier Extreme follows a similar structure to normal mode, with a handful of new mechanics and more complex patterns for those already present. But before we begin, it's important to first assign each DPS to a tank or a healer, forming 4 pairs total, each designated to their respective cardinal and intercardinal directions. This will come in handy to avoid overlapping players and executing mechanics in a timely fashion, and is often agreed on by using ground markers at the beginning of the instance. Now let's get started with the fight proper. Upon engaging the boss, healers should be mindful of Screams of the Damned, a recurring party-wide attack that deals moderate damage. Shortly after, Suzaku will take to the skies, marking all players with Rekindle and reappearing in a random location outside the platform. Players should quickly take note of Suzaku's new position to avoid her upcoming dive bomb, in addition to spreading along the edges of the platform to prevent overlapping damage. It's important to note that if any marker detonates within range of the fallen phoenixes in the center, they will spring back to life, and thus should be avoided. Upon returning, Suzaku will cast Fleeting Summer, a wide cone AoE that targets a random player, but can be comfortably avoided by staying relatively close to the boss. In the meantime, tanks should keep an eye out for Cremate, a hard-hitting, single-target tank buster that should always be mitigated with a defensive cooldown. And for the final mechanic of Phase 1, Suzaku will cast Phoenix Down, summoning several feathers and plumes in one of 2 possible alternating patterns. While the bigger scarlet feathers can and should be ignored, all pairs must quickly locate and eliminate their respective scarlet plumes, according to their assigned positions. Around the same time, all 4 DPS marked with Rekindle will be tasked with reviving their respective Phoenix, so that they can be brought away from further explosions and slain within the newly created safe areas. Once all Scarlet Ladies have been eliminated, Suzaku will begin her ritual of rebirth, leading us into the next phase.
You gave me the strength to rise from the ashes!
The transition segment remains largely similar to normal mode, with the only difference being the increased speed with which the orbs will travel to the center. Despite still being relatively trivial, successfully clearing this mechanic will reward each player with up to 10 stacks of damage up, and is highly encouraged.
I will protect you, I promise!
Upon being reborn into her awakened form, Suzaku will no longer execute mechanics from Phase 1, but will gain an entirely new set of abilities. Among them, we have Southron Star, a powerful party-wide attack that is often combined with other mechanics throughout the remainder of the fight. Secondly, we have Mesmerizing Melody. This ability will pull players a significant distance towards the center of the platform. In later stages of the fight, Suzaku may execute the opposite version of this mechanic, Ruthless Refrain, pushing players away instead of pulling them in. This mechanic is accompanied by a very distinct whistle, giving players enough time to relocate before the displacement registers. Continuing in sequence, Suzaku will execute Well of Flame, prompting players to spread out to avoid overlapping any damage markers, and collapse back together behind the boss to mitigate the stacking mechanic that follows. The only exception being the main tank, who should remain away from the party in preparation for Suzaku's tank buster mechanic, Phantom Flurry. Following a sequence of kicks and marking the tank with vulnerability, Suzaku will perform an extremely wide and untelegraphed attack in the same direction. It's important to note that tank swapping can be performed anytime once Phantom Flurry begins casting, as Suzaku will not face a different direction until the entire mechanic completes.
Hearken to my melody.
Up next, we have Suzaku's signature mechanic, Scarlet Hymn. While similar to its normal mode counterpart, Scarlet Hymn is significantly longer on extreme mode unless combined with other mechanics. To tackle it, players should first locate Suzaku's Phoenix to identify which sequence will be performed, and quickly skim through the sequence itself to determine its pattern. The first of which is the merry-go-round pattern from normal mode, where players can simply move into the first color after it explodes, and continue alternating between quadrants to avoid being hit. And secondly, the mirror pattern, commonly identified by the repeating symbols in the middle. Starting from the fourth color, players can simply move to any adjacent quadrant after they explode, and wait for 2 consecutive explosions before moving back. After repeating a number of her previous mechanics, Suzaku will cast Close Quarters Crescendo, a mechanic that forces players to travel in their indicated directions, either after a few seconds or upon touching them. While this mechanic may seem harmless on its own, Crescendo will reoccur alongside Scarlet Hymn at a later portion of the fight, where players can simply aim their march towards either the first or the second colors to explode. And lastly, we have Incandescent Interlude. Upon execution, Suzaku will summon 4 evenly distributed meteor markers around the platform and begin casting Ruthless Refrain. Using the same positions from Phase 1, all pairs should gravitate towards their designated quadrants, so as to be knocked back into their respective meteors, with the exception of those marked with Rekindle, who should rotate clockwise and avoid the meteors instead. At this point, you have seen all the mechanics this fight has to offer, with Suzaku repeating and combining many of her previous abilities in different but predictable ways. Remember to keep a close eye on her cast bar to anticipate upcoming mechanics, and be sure to use Suzaku's own performance to your advantage.
If it must be thus, then I'm glad. It is you.